Hello everybody, and welcome back to our next program. You are in for a big treat today. We are in the home of Susan Dossetter. Susan Dossetter has been one of our most important and intriguing presenters in virtual doll convention history. She started with us in the very beginning, and some of her most notable programs are on her amazing doll houses and very early wooden dolls. Her storytelling is just fantastic, and you can't help but be drawn in and understand what she's trying to say. And so we are here for another program, which is very exciting because it's been a couple of years. So it's a really big deal that we're back. We have a wonderful surprise in store for you. It is something that Susan has entered into her collection since the last time we were here, and you're just gonna love it. So without further ado, Susan Dossetter.
Hello. I am so happy to be here today to present you with a brand new program. It has been almost 2 years, more than 2 years actually, since I did an online video presentation for Rachel. And during that period, I was very fortunate to acquire a wonderful new early dollhouse. And that is what I'm going to be sharing with you today. The dollhouse is special for many reasons. First of all, I explained in an earlier presentation that it is very rare to find an early dollhouse in its all original condition. Oftentimes they're painted over, wallpapered over, altered inside and or out. And this dollhouse is in its all original state. Secondly, I explained previously that it is also very rare to find a dollhouse with its original contents, particularly an early dollhouse. This dollhouse is literally overflowing with its original contents. I only have one other house in my collection, so now fortunately I have two with their original contents. And thirdly, it is very rare and special indeed to have an early doll or dollhouse that comes with provenance, its history. And this dollhouse is literally packed with provenance, much of which I'll share with you today. The dollhouse is called the Gregson House, and I am entitling this presentation, The Gregson House, A Labor of Love. And you'll learn why I chose that title soon. The Gregson House was built in 1830 by Miss Elizabeth Wilkinson, also known as Bessie. Elizabeth was the heir to a huge iron dynasty. Her father was William Wilkinson. Her uncle was John Iron Mad Wilkinson, who was known to be the most prominent iron master of the British Industrial Revolution. Elizabeth also had a beloved sister, Mary Ann, who had 7 children. But very sadly, Mary Ann died in childbirth on June 7th of 1829. So Elizabeth built the dollhouse for her surviving nieces and nephews as a diversion from their grief. By the way, they had named the baby that survived Mary, and they named the dollhouse Maryland Lodge. Well, I had known about the Gregson House virtually my whole collecting life because it is featured in one of Vivian Green's books, Family Dolls Houses, which was published in 1973. So I had loved this dollhouse since I was a little girl. When I learned the dollhouse was going to be coming up for sale, I was really excited to potentially have the chance of owning it for myself. But during the relatively short time between when I learned the dollhouse was coming up for sale and the auction itself, something happened in our personal life that made me want the dollhouse even more. On June 16th, 2022, our baby daughter was born, and her labor and delivery was very normal and uncomplicated and ordinary for a long time, until all of a sudden at the end it wasn't. But due to the miracles of modern medicine and modern technology, everyone in the end was okay. But it was some of the scariest minutes of our lives. And at the end, all my husband and I could think and what we could say to each other over and over, and still to this day, is, what if? What if this had been 200 years ago? What if this had been even 100 years ago? Even 50 years ago? Things might have been quite different. They likely would have. So the dollhouse brought a whole new meaning to me at that point. And our daughter's birth date is literally days different to the birth date of Mary Ann's baby daughter, Mary. So in the wee hours of the morning, when I got the phone call from overseas to bid on this house, of course, she woke up and needed to feed. And here I am on the phone trying to feed her and bid on the house at the same time. And it wasn't easy. But in the end, I got the doll's house. And I feel so lucky to have it. Elizabeth Wilkinson, Aunt Bessie, lived in a beautiful stately home called Aston Hall. It was a Jacobean house that was designed by John Thorpe and it was built between the years of 1618 and 1635, along with the boxes and files full of provenance that came with the house, which included lists and letters, etc. There were several beautiful antique lithographs of Aston Hall, it having been, and still is, quite an important stately home. I chose my favorite, and I had it framed, and it's here on the wall for you to see. So this is Aston Hall. This is where Elizabeth Wilkinson, Aunt Bessie, lived, and where the Dollhouse lived, and where her nieces and nephews came to play with the house. So you're probably wondering, where is this dollhouse? This is the dollhouse. Now, you may remember in my very first presentation to you, I shared an early English cabinet house from the 18th century. And I mentioned that the earliest dollhouses in Holland were called Dutch cabinet houses, for the simple reason that they were just that. They were often beautiful ornate cabinets that had been made into dolls' houses. This takes it to a whole new level. This is a cupboard house. This is a thick, heavy cupboard that has been made into a dollhouse. And no one walking through this room would ever suspect what is behind these doors. But you'll see soon. I've shared with you now how the Gregson House was a labor of love for Aunt Bessie Wilkinson for her nieces and nephews. And now I'm going to share with you how it's a labor of love for me today and ongoing. So, as you can see, this house is huge. It is 6 feet 9 inches tall, 5 feet 7 inches wide, and 2 feet deep. And it was quite the effort to even get this dollhouse into my house. I documented this with photographs, which I'll share with you now. Here is the dollhouse as it arrived on a truck. As you can see, it's in a great big wooden crate. And these guys are big, tall guys, and they're practically dwarfed by the dollhouse. Here we can see it was uncrated, and it was wrapped with protective thick paper. And you can see again just how huge this dollhouse is. They had to wrap the house with thin, like giant saran wrap, because one of the doors kept opening. And they wanted to protect the house as well, but mostly one of the doors kept opening, which is, I'll explain why that happened to you in just a bit. The first thing we had to do before we brought this monster into the house was clean it. There were lots of videos and photographs of the house, and it looked like it was in clean and good condition, the contents, everything. Well, unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So here is just the ceiling, the top of the house, the roof of the house, and it was literally black. And first we just took rags and tried to get as much dirt off as possible. I didn't want to bring that dirt into the house. And here is a picture of just a few of the rags. They were literally black. Here I am holding one. And I didn't even consider putting them in the washing machine. I just tossed them right in the trash. Once we got the most dirt off, we used a vacuum to try to get some additional dust. And then began the laborious effort of getting this monster into the house. Here are my two big, strong guys carrying it up the exterior steps. Now, I had measured very carefully, and I had planned to put this dollhouse on a large second-floor stair landing. Oftentimes, large dollhouses or baby houses were housed on stair landings. And my movers are wonderful. They're professional, they're top-notch. They know my house inside and out. We all thought that there would be no problem getting the house up the stairs to that stair landing. Well, we were wrong. They spent over an hour and a half trying every which way to get this house up the stairs, and it literally got stuck. It was bad news. So I had to think quick on my feet, where was I going to put this house? It couldn't go down, it couldn't go up. It had to stay on the ground floor. So we ended up putting it here. They were extremely patient. We had to move all kinds of furniture, another dollhouse. They tried it here, they tried it there. They were so wonderful. I really am indebted to them. They were here for hours. And in the end, it landed here, and I actually think it looks really nice here. Okay, so their labor was done, and now began mine. This house had so much restoration needed. I had no idea. None of this showed in any of the photographs or videos of the house. For one thing, the base was literally cracked and collapsing. The house was in danger of completely collapsing on itself. So the base needed attention immediately. The house had all kinds of problems. There were great big chunks of wood out of it. There were great big cracks, big chunks that were cracked up. This was about maybe 6 or 8 inches long. at least. There were major scrapes where the paint was missing. There was overpaint, there was white paint, there was green paint, and inside the house there were pieces of wood trim that had come off. There was balustrade missing on the stairwell. So I have a wonderful guy who is an antiques furniture restorer. And recently, last few years, I've had him work on dollhouse projects here or there, and he's amazing. He is a true artist. That is a dying breed, I have to say. It's getting harder and harder to find people to work on these projects, but he is incredible. So he came in and he had to bring a helper, and their first order of business was securing the base. They put a bracket in that you cannot and never will see, and they filled it and secured it. So now it is solid as a rock. This house isn't going anywhere. They did an amazing job. Then he got to work on all the cracks and the chunks of wood that were off and the painting, and he just did just a beautiful job. You can see him here working, and here he is touching up paint. Now this house, the cupboard, is made of pine, a very ordinary wood, but it is faux grained, as you can see. This was a very popular practice in the 18th and 19th centuries. It originates from the Renaissance and 18th century France. And it was something that people did to make an ordinary wood look more special. And my guy was just amazing, and he did the minimal amount. You can see it's not perfect in any shape of the word. There's still imperfections. But I didn't want to make it perfect. It really was kind of ugly in certain spots here, and it's in a beautiful room in our home, and I needed to secure it and restore it so that it could stay for at least the next 200 years. And so you can still say that this is in its original state. Restoration, careful, sensitive restoration, is not only okay, it's required in many circumstances with dolls and dolls' houses so that it can survive for the next 200 years. Here is just a sample of a few of my guy's supplies. I mean, you can see he's a true artist. He's not a painter, and yet he has all of these different paints and pigments and brushes. He did just an amazing job. I mean, I was just beyond thrilled. Now, there were screws that were missing on the inside hinges. He replaced those with just the right style of screw, the right diameter. We blackened them so they would look old and blend in. And then the reason the door wasn't closing was because there is a lock, but there was no key. And the lock was stuck in the open position, so the bolt, or the closed position I should say, the bolt was sticking out. And so this door was not closing, it wouldn't lock, it wouldn't stay shut, and it was a problem. So we took the lock out, I took it to a locksmith, they fixed it so that it was working, and I had to choose a key. That was really difficult, to find a key that was the right style and would be sensitive to the house, just the right style key. And they had to actually get one type and then cut it and alter it. It was quite the effort. It was much harder than I thought it would be. And then we ebonized it so that it would look old. And now it works perfectly, you'll see soon. So my mover's work was done, and my furniture restorer's work was done, and now really, truly my work started. I had to clean this house inside and out, and it was quite the job. Here are some rags that I use to clean the house. When I first clean a house, I take little brushes and I brush all the cracks and crevices to get out the dust. Then I have a really tiny miniature vacuum that has little tiny hoses so I can suck up more dust if need be. And there always is more, believe me. You have to be very careful that you don't suck up anything you don't want to. But I get the dust off. And then I go in with these thin cotton rags, and I typically use a solution of a very tiny amount of Murphy oil soap mixed with water. And Murphy oil soap, I have found, is a really good product because first, you don't have to rinse it off. Secondly, it cleans beautifully, and it adds a little moisture and sheen. Now, you can only use it on wood, of course, and you have to use it carefully. But I think it does a really good job. And I'm going to share with you some other products that I use as well, so that hopefully that can be helpful for you guys in your restoration projects. The other thing I use is Q-tips. Boy, I went through over 250 Q-tips. Now I use the regular kind, and then there's also one that's called precision tip. That's a pointy tip, so you can get in really fine spaces. And I guess that's made for makeup or for crafts, and they work really well, the precision tip Q-tips. I went through 250 Q-tips. Every time I thought it was clean, I would do another pass and it would come out black, 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 as a crow. My husband said, Susan, it's the coal. And I'm like, duh, yes. At that time, coal was used for heating and for cooking. And in a house such as Aston Hall, it would have taken dozens of servants to try to stay on top of the soot and the grime and the residue from heating and cooking with coal. And I'm sure that they paid a lot of attention to the main house and the furniture, but not a lot of attention to the dollhouse, particularly inside of the dollhouse. And every single accessory piece of furniture, not to mention the house itself, was black with, really black with this from coal. Here is a picture of the house, finally clean and sturdy and ready to play with. Okay, so now the fun began of furnishing the house. That was that's always the most exciting part. Although it did require a lot of work that I didn't expect, which I mentioned earlier. So, as I said, the house came with loads and loads of original contents. Now you have to understand, this house had been played with by generation after generation after generation of children. So it was a great big assortment of everything from very fine rare pieces down to junk, I have to say. And a lot of broken things and so forth. There are even some little electric lamps, dollhouse lamps, that were probably from the 70s, I'm guessing, or 80s. But I have to say, and I'll say it again because it's so important, when I decided what I wanted to furnish the house with, I didn't use everything. There's too much to begin with. But also I chose the things that were special and wonderful and that I think were of the period of the house, which was 1830. And then some of them later, 1840s, 50s, 60s, you'll see. But none of the really late stuff. But I kept everything with the house. I didn't take a thing away from the house. The extras are stored in the drawers that are underneath the house, which I'll show you later also. I kept everything with the house, and I cleaned and repaired everything as well. Even the things that I ended up not using in the house. I just feel it's so important to keep the items, which are part of the provenance, part of the story, the history of the house, with the house. And that so rarely happens. So here is everything that came with the house laid out. And I mean, it was just overwhelming. It was just mind-boggling. I have some closer up photos of some of the groups of things. I tried to arrange them by groups. So here we've got rugs and beds. And you'll see all of this soon in the house in situ very soon. And here we have fireplace inserts and other things. Here we have some of the best things in the house. There's a very large set of early hand-painted tin Evans and Cartwright chairs. Those are extremely rare. And another thing that's really special is that Elizabeth Wilkinson, Aunt Bessie, was an artist, and she painted miniature watercolors that are all with the house. And you'll see them as well in situ, but here is just a couple of pictures of how many there were and how much fun it was to go through all of these things. I really had a lot of work to do in cleaning everything. I just took little snapshots of some of my supplies, the glues, the brushes, the Q-tips again. And one thing I learned to use was that the carpets, a lot of them are very delicate fabric. I vacuumed where I could, but some of them I couldn't even hardly touch because they're really fragile and starting to melt and come apart. So I ended up using a lint roller for a lot of the carpetings and the floor coverings, and I also used it for some of the fabrics. You have to be so careful with fabrics. I have tales of woe with fabrics that I've treated wrongly, and I just wanted to be so careful. So with the fabrics, I primarily brushed and used these rollers. Some of the whites I was able to wash, but you have to be very careful, as I'm sure you know. And this is kind of a funny story. There was a copper tea kettle, and I was cleaning it, and I looked inside, and I saw something kind of spiny and white. Well, it turned out that it was a little petrified spider, which is why I think it was white. So I'm like, oh, are you a Regency era spider? And it was dead, so it could have been. However, if it was alive, I think it probably would have been like saying something like, oh, Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. Or maybe Outlander. I mentioned I cleaned and repaired everything, even the lesser items that I didn't end up using in the house. So here's an example. All of these were broken. This just simple basic plate was broken in 3 places, and someone else might have tossed it, but I washed the pieces and then I glued it together. The only things I didn't keep were there a couple of pieces of glass items where it was literally dangerous. They were sharp and jagged and they were dangerous. So I think you waited long enough. Time to open the house. So again, the lock now works perfectly. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to go room by room and show you some of my favorite pieces and also continue the story. We'll start over here. This dollhouse has 3 bedrooms. I don't have another dollhouse in my whole collection with 3 bedrooms. They usually have 1, sometimes 2. And it's kind of cool to have 3 bedrooms. As I've described before in other presentations, an early dollhouse bed is a very, very rare item. As you can imagine, they often were broken, and they were typically made of wood. And sometimes you'll find them, but it's extremely rare if they have their original bedclothes. All 3 of these beds have their original bedclothes. The house did come with dolls, and I will show you these dolls later. But they're not of the period of the house, except for maybe 1. And they were not in good condition, the clothing was not good, and I don't believe that they were the original dolls for the house. They couldn't have been. This dollhouse was built in 1830, and at that time, the dolls that were so popular in England were Grosvenor dolls. And I love Grosvenor dolls, and I have a lot of them, and I was just dreaming, fantasizing of placing little Grosvenor dolls in this house. So that's what I did. But I kept the original dolls that came with the house to me, with the house, as I'll show you later. So I have little Grosvenor dolls scattered about, and I love the high ceilings, and I love how the little tiny Grosvenor dolls look with this tall, tall rooms. This is a very rare piece, this little tin armoire. A lot of the needlepoint work was made by Elizabeth herself, including this little rug, which has a Union Jack on it. Almost all the furniture, I would say about 90% at least, maybe 95% of the furniture came with the house. I did add the dolls, as I just mentioned, and the house came with lots and lots of accessories, but I did also add a few of my own. If I had a really, really early house from like the 17th century or early 18th century that came with its original contents, I probably would leave it alone and I wouldn't add anything or change it. I mean, if I had Nostell Priory, for example, or any of the other famous houses you've seen in museums or stately homes, it's better to leave them alone. But this house's story continues, and it was added to over 200 years to many generations of children, and it's so fun, and it would be very difficult not to add some of my own things. It's just too much fun. So anyway, some of these accessories, such as this little miniature book, I added, and again the dolls. Now these are printed lithographs. These are not Bessie's watercolors. But let's move on to the next bedroom. Now this bedroom has the most fantastic 4-poster tester bed. Again, very difficult to clean the fabric, but I did my best, and that bed was in horrible condition. Here I have some pictures of the bed. I had to glue and repair the wood sections, and in the middle of it all, I needed a weight. I needed something to weigh it down, so I looked around, what should I use? You get very creative. This is my phone brick. I was charging my phone at the time. A phone brick makes a great weight. What else can I show you in this room? There's just so many wonderful little things. Here's another little needle pointed rug. They're just wonderful. And oh, here we have the Aunt Bessie's watercolors. These were all done by Aunt Bessie. She was quite the wonderful artist. This little doll is holding a little silver lorgnette, and on the handle it says, "Love is blind." And on to the next bedroom. One of Aunt Bessie's watercolors is over the bed. I think I call this the nursery. I think it was the nursery. I can show you pictures of the house in how it was in Vivian Green's book. You can see the beds are in the same rooms as they were, and I tried to keep the rooms as they were originally, for the most part. We have the bedrooms, and we have the dining room and the music room, etc. So I had this book to go by, and also had the photographs obviously from the auction catalog, so I stuck with that layout, and I loved it. Okay, now moving on to this room, which is the music room. I have a lot to talk about. The first thing is that these curtains were in horrible condition. So as you can see, there are no windows in the house at all. It's solid. But there were these mirrors, large mirrors, in this room and in the room on the left that had these curtains. So I figured, okay, they're trying to do a facsimile of a mirror, of a window, which I think works quite well. However, this fabric was ripped to shreds. Here I have a picture of how you can see how it was so horribly ripped. So what on earth do you do with that? Well, I used this fabric fusion glue and a toothpick, and I just put a few tiny little dots in the most critical areas. I just put a cardboard box in the room to lay it on while it dried, and I don't think anyone would ever know that there were these giant rips in this fabric. It ended up working out quite well. The other thing in this room that needed a lot of attention was this lovely Regency era settee. So first of all, one of the legs had come off. That was an easy fix. And I love this weld bond glue. I like it even better than wood glue. Sometimes I use wood glue, but I love this weld bond. So I secured it all, glued on any pieces that were missing. But the most challenging part was the upholstery. I had never reupholstered an item of doll furniture before. And at first I thought, okay, I'll just put some pillows and dolls on it. No one will ever notice. It'll be fine. I'll leave it original. But I just couldn't live with that. The side, literally the stuffing was coming out. Everything was ripped and stained. It looked horrible. So I reupholstered it. I had this fabric that was this sort of faded pinkish beigey color that I thought would work well in the room. The original fabric was pink silk, but I decided to go with this instead. Here I have a picture of during the process. This instant grip glue is amazing. It takes tacky glue to a whole nother hemisphere. It's just so easy to work with this instant grip glue. And I always use toothpicks. And there you go. It's all fresh and reupholstered, and I think the color works really well with the room. Now the watercolors, this room is filled with Aunt Bessie's watercolors, and I could kind of see where they were located by these faded areas on the wall surrounding where the pictures would have been. So you can see the original wallpaper was quite vibrant pink. I did my best to place them where they would have been, but there are still a couple of empty spots, but who knows why. And then this is a fabulous thing. This is all done by Elizabeth Wilkinson, this beautiful needle-pointed rug, which is tacked onto the floor, by the way, as are all the floor coverings. Now, a couple pieces of furniture in this room are mentioned in Flora Gill Jacobs' book, and I wanted to share them with you. I've always said that I like to put things in dolls' houses that weren't necessarily originally made for dolls' houses, because I think that children in the past did so as well. Now, I have several collector friends who are purists, and they only put dollhouse items in their dollhouses, and I think that is so admirable. Really hard to do though. But anyway, one piece in this, there are actually 3 pieces in this room that were not originally meant for a dollhouse. They were needlework items. Now, one of the members of our party here in the music room is this lovely lady, and she's a very special Godner doll because she has actual hair added to her wooden coiffure, plus that fanciful feather on top. One piece is this lovely music stand. So this was originally meant as a needle case. There's a little booklet that slips out from the back where needles were kept. And it has a piece of sheet music on the front. And the title, funnily enough, is upside down. But it is the Duncan Gray Quadrille. One thing I think I'm going to do now is try to find that piece of music and listen to it. Maybe I could record it and have it playing in the house. Another piece that was originally meant for needle work is this lovely cello, which is actually a pin cushion. There's little pins all around. And then the third piece is this bookcase. So this is a lovely bookcase, as you can see, very ornate. Little books painted on. The front opens up, it's like a drawer, and inside there's a pin cushion for pins and little compartments where I guess they put thimbles or a spool of thread. But this was meant originally as a needlework piece. So I'm going to read you what Flora Gill Jacobs says in her book about these pieces. She says, "Were they, these cardboard and gilt pieces, all made by neat fingers at one special stall, perhaps Church's, in the Lowther, spelled L-O-H-E-R, Lowther Arcade, or at the Civic Cat in Oxford Street, or at the Soho Bazaar? They may have been bought over some 10 years, judging from the houses in which they are found, as presents for older children, and there is an affinity between these pieces, as if one person, or perhaps 2 sisters, had invented and perfected them and sold them professionally. The gilt paper, too, looks as if it were cut professionally, like the stamped metal discs and the paper ornamentation sold to amateurs who embellished theatrical prints for amusement. It would be a subject for research, which, after all, has been done in smaller fields and with slighter clues. I find Flora Gill Jacobs' writing in this later book in particular. She had an earlier book that was published in 1955 called English Dolls' Houses, but her writing in this book is very flowery. She goes on, gets off the topic. I find it really charming. Now, I have seen loads of these needlework pieces, not loads, but a fair enough amount that I don't believe they were made by one person or 2 sisters, but still, it's fun to hear her talk about it. And then I haven't had time to research all of those locations that she mentioned, like Lowther's Arcade and the Civic Cat. I think that would be a really fun project to do. So the research continues on and on with these projects, and it's just so interesting and fun to just keep going with it all. One last thing I wanted to share with you in this room is a pair of accessories that I added. I just thought they looked great, and I think they're just fascinating. If you look on top of the mantle, there are two sort of tureen-shaped pieces. I'm going to bring one out for you to study more closely. I wonder if anybody can guess what this is made out of. These are made out of cocoons. Someone actually went outside, searched for a cocoon, plucked off a cocoon, I guess, I don't know, dried it, I don't know anything about cocoons, made it into this little basket with tops that open and a handle, and sewed on these tiny beads. The fact that someone would do all of that, that they would have time to do all of that, and the fact that they survived, a pair of them to this day, I think is quite remarkable. And I just thought they looked lovely here with the gold accents and so forth. So again, I did add some of the accessories. And I have 2 additional cocoons. This isn't the first time I've had a cocoon. This is a very similar shape. And again, the top lifts open. And look at that beadwork. Look at that little ziggy-zaggy. How could you do that on a cocoon? Crazy. And this one is a little simpler. It's just a little basket or purse. The top comes off, and again, it's made out of a cocoon. This is another accessory I added. I think this is amazing as well. This is a little tiny, I love miniature books. I have a sub collection of miniature books, as I do miniature silver, miniature porcelain, miniature portraits, etc. And I love miniature books. And this is a tiny little hand-painted watercolor album. Look at the tiny, tiny painting. Little bird, all kinds of little tiny pictures, little tiny, and I thought this was appropriate for the house because again, Aunt Bessie's little watercolors, and it kind of fits in. Maybe this would have been her sketchbook. Okay, now we go into the next room. Well, you may have noticed the ladies in the music room, and especially the lady with the feather in her hair, and this house reminds me of Bridgerton. I love thinking that this could be one of the Bridgerton houses. And here we have the dining room, and here we have those magnificent Evison Cartwright chairs, so many of them, is just mind-boggling. And I think the biggest story in this room, other than the wonderful set of chairs, is the chandelier, okay? This chandelier was made in Lauscha, Bavaria. It's glass. And this chandelier came in horrific condition. It was broken to bits. And I'm going to show you how that went. So, let's see. Okay, first of all, the chandelier was hanging by literally just a store ribbon with printing on it. It was broken in half. The circle that makes the main body of the chandelier was broken in half, and so in 2 places, and it was literally held together with Scotch tape. It was missing 2 of the 4 candle holders. So the first thing I did was take off the tape, take off the wax, and I soaked it. And here it is drying, and here it is hanging, and you can see it's just hanging limp. I attached it with a piece of string to a doll stand you might recognize, and I added a silver piece of chain, and to get the circle to adhere together was one of the most challenging chores I've ever had in my dollhouse life. I tried every kind of glue imaginable, every kind of crazy glue, instant glue, glass glue, whatever, nothing worked. I had to get these 2 tiny little pieces together. The diameter of this piece of glass is no thicker than a wire really, and I had to get the ends stuck together exactly at the same time. So I discovered this glue called E6000. Some of my friends say, oh, you didn't know about that? Anyway, no, I hadn't known about that. So it's called E6000. It was a miracle. And I managed to glue the 2 pieces together perfectly. I laid it to rest on an Ovaltine can because of the plastic top. I thought if there was any dripping, I could maybe get it off later, off of the glass. And, but I didn't have that problem. It was so viscous, it was so thick, it worked amazingly well. And then there was one crystal ring missing. So I found online this silver ring that was about the same diameter and with the little etching in it. So I mean, if I didn't tell you that was there, you probably would never notice it. So maybe I shouldn't have told you. Anyway, what to do about the 2 missing candle holders? I found on Etsy just simple handmade clear new dollhouse plates, and they were the same diameter as the existing candle holder cups, and they even had the depth. And so I glued those on, and then I put matching candles, and voila! I don't think anyone would know if I hadn't told you so. Keep it a secret. The table, by the way, has a drawer on the other side as well. There was one knob missing from each side, so I took one off and put it there. So shh, keep that a secret too. And now on to the drawing room. So the biggest challenge here was that this quote-unquote window, the mirror, did not have curtains. And I really wanted it to match the other side. So what do you do about that? Well, I have a big collection of textiles that are part of my collection, but I didn't have anything that would work. I needed something that really matched, and I never thought in a million years that I would find it, but I did. This is the piece of a remnant of the mesh that I found, and if you look and you compare it to the original, it is almost the same. It is antique, it is silk, it is mesh, very tiny fine mesh, pretty much the same exact color. And then there's a hem, a seam all around it that has about 1/4 of an inch wide silk ribbon running through. I still to this day have no idea how they managed to make that hem and slip it in. I don't see a single stitch, I don't see any glue, I don't know how they did it. And this turned out to be the most challenging project of all the restoration projects in the house, even more challenging than the chandelier. I found the fabric, I found ribbon that matched almost identically, it's really close. But to get that seam and to get the ribbon in it was really tricky, but I did it. I think it's not perfect, but I don't think anyone would notice the imperfections. And the house itself has lots of imperfections, so you don't need things to be perfect, really. The other thing I wanted to share with you in this room is this flower stand. This flower stand in the corner, it was in terrible condition. Again, I had to glue it together. It was missing most of its flowers, but there were other flowers with the house, and I added the flowers to them. And the most interesting thing about the plant stand is on the bottom there is a label, and it says, W. Child's Fancy Repository, 51 Kings Road, corner of Middle Street in Brighton. So this really intrigued me. So first of all, I searched on the internet about that shop, and I found an article that talks about that part of town in Brighton, and it's called Earliest Development of the Old Town. So it turns out that this shop was located in what is now this ugly public building. And I'll read to you what it says. At the corner of South Street stands the former Sea House Public House. That would have been like a bar or a pub. Originally known as the Ship in Distress. Until the construction of King's Road in 1822, the Sea House stood at the cliff edge, but it was rebuilt and renamed in that year. The large public room was used by the magistrates and town commissioners for several years. In September 1830, William IV visited Nelson's widow, Viscountess Bronte, there, and the inn became the Royal Sea House. When it was rebuilt in the 1870s, the inn business was restricted to the corner of South Street only, the southern part being converted to a toy and fancy goods repository. So here we have a little piece of furniture, a plant stand, that originally came to me in pieces and is now tucked in the corner, which tells a whole story about the house and the children that played with the house and loved the house. Brighton was a very popular destination for many, many years. In 1730, 100 years before this house was even made, it was popular as a destination to take the seawater. People would bathe in the seawater and sometimes even drink the seawater. They thought that it was cure for ailments and illness. In 1760, it became the port for boats that were departing to France. And in 1783, the Prince Regent, later George IV, visited Brighton and fell in love with it. He built the Brighton Pavilion, which was completed in 1820. Now I just imagine these children going on a trip to Brighton, going to that little toy shop and saying, oh mama, could we have that for the doll's house? This is the story that I have in my head, and it's not an unlikely one. It would have taken a train in 1770 32 hours to travel from Birmingham to Brighton, or perhaps 48 hours on a fancy sleeper car. So it would have been a journey, a trip, something very, very special for these children. Or maybe the parents went on their own and picked it up for them, but I kind of like to imagine these little children, probably the grandchildren of the original children that played with this house, taking a train trip to Brighton, visiting this toy shop, and picking out that little piece for the house. There's a couple of other small items in this room I wanted to share. One is this little rebus puzzle. I became enchanted with the idea of rebus puzzles. I have never been able to figure them out. They're so challenging. This is a tiny little miniature one. Just a bit of ephemera. I love ephemera. The word ephemera comes from the fact that these pieces are almost ephemeral. It's a miracle that they survived, these bits of paper and so forth. And it's a miracle that this survived. Now this is something I added because I thought it really speaks to the story of the house. This is a tiny little Grotner baby, but she's in a coffin. So I'm guessing that this was a gift as a memorial to someone who had lost a baby. In 1830, the death rate for infants under the age of 1 was 20 to 30%, which meant that 1 out of every 5 babies didn't live to become 1. So the fact that baby Mary Ann's daughter, survived, and our daughter is here today, it's just a very, very poignant story, I feel. Now we come to one of the most fascinating rooms in the house. In the catalog, this is described as the distillery, but Flora Gill Jacobs calls it a still room. So that made me question, what is the difference between a distillery and a still room? So I researched, and this is what I came up with. The still room is a room for preparing household compounds found in most great houses, castles, or large establishments throughout Europe, dating back to at least medieval times. Still rooms were used to make products as varied as candles, furniture polish, and soap. Distillery was only one of the tasks carried out there. The still room was a working room, part chemistry lab, part compounding pharmacy, part perfumery, part beverage factory, and part kitchen. Professional manufacturers, such as dispensing chemists and apothecaries, gradually took over many stillroom tasks, producing the products of the stillroom commercially. Its use for food preservation also declined with the commercialization of preserved food. Now here we have a picture of a stillroom. This is a stillroom in a household manual of 1742 with hanging herbs, mortars and pestles, alembics, sealed jars, many drawers, a small library, a stove near the door, and a row of bee skeps outside. So that made me question, what is an alembic? So this is an alembic. Alembic comes from the Arabic, but originating from ancient Greek, is an alchemical still consisting of 2 vessels connected by a tube used for distillation of liquids. So I do not yet have a miniature alembic, and I don't doubt very much one exists, but that's something I could look for. And you can see how the researching of these items is a lesson in social history. And it's like going down a rabbit hole, but it is a wonderful rabbit hole. And you go on and on and on. And I'm going to read you what Flora Gill Jacobs says about the still room. So first of all, she is confident that it's the only dollhouse still room she's ever seen. And she says, here is the still room. It is a delight to survey the ranges of built-in cupboards curved round the room. On the table is a moderator lamp. On the floor, a basket having 6 divisions for bottles. To enumerate the many small beauties might tire a reader, but she can at least stand back and admire the general effect, greedily imagining the contents of those impeccably ordered cupboards. Coffee beans, doubtless, and tea, but sugar plums, Parliament gingerbread, as in a flat iron for a farthing, sugar candy on a string, raspberry cordial, raisins, almonds, homemade candied peel, and there would be special, delicately thin biscuits to accompany a mid-morning glass of Madeira, and glasses of choose a delicacy, surely the right word, on your visit, remembering that you may also choose the season, but the year must be one not long since the birth of Albert Edward, Prince of Wales. He was born in 1841, by the way. Edward Albert, Prince of Wales. So, you know, she just brings this room to life. Gave me ideas of other things that I could potentially add. The cupboards aren't quite full yet. She calls this the hall, but it is the hall, but to me it's like, this is a group of sisters. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They all came together. You could see they're clearly dressed by, you know, a sister, 2 sisters, or a girl on her own, whatever, but they were all or maybe a group of children, but they all came together, and they had been together forever. And I had them under a dome, and I said, okay, it's finally time to release them and free them into the world. And again, this reminds me of Bridgerton, because to me they're coming down for the ball. And here on the wall we have a picture of the lady herself. This is Elizabeth Wilkinson. And on the back it says, Aunt Bessie, Miss Wilkinson, maker of Dollhouse. You can see it has that early writing when there's a double S, one of the S's is printed as or written as an F. Now these strings, a lot of them were broken. That was another chore that I had to do, was repair the strings. That was not easy either, but I really wanted the strings to all be the same original strings, so I managed to figure that out. So here they are coming down for the ball. And again, we have a little Union Jack on a stand, beadwork. Just imagining them sitting and doing this. It's just so fun. And then finally we have the kitchen, a wonderful kitchen filled with so much stuff. I mean, in there I put items inside the cupboards and everything. So much, so much. This floor covering, I believe, is meant to be a facsimile for a woven straw floor covering that was popular at that time. It kind of helped keep the kitchen cool, and the sand or dust would go underneath the straw. So that was popular, and I believe this. Or it could be meant to look like tiles, either one. And I kind of created a laundry area. I just felt that was begging to be a laundry area. And again, I pay no regard to scale. You know, these pieces came with the house. I would have probably put them there anyway, even if they hadn't. And I like mixing up scale, like this giant fork on the table or this giant spoon on the chair. I think it, again, as I've said over and over, I feel it makes it more toy-like and childlike and primitive to mix up the scale. So you've got all different scales mixed up. And just in case you're wondering, that is the copper tea kettle where the petrified spider was living. But I promise you, he's gone now. He's not going to be in your cup of tea. Okay, well now I'm going to show you the things I didn't put in the house. As I mentioned, I kept everything with the house. I feel that's extremely important. And fortunately, there were these drawers in the cupboard. So I'll pull one out for you to see. Here we go. These are some of the things that I didn't use. Okay, now here we have one of the electrified lamps that I mentioned. So I think you could see why I maybe didn't put them in the house. But I've kept everything here. And you know, it's been quite tempting now and then to take something from this collection and use it somewhere else. For example, this is a perfectly beautiful brass fire fender, but I decided not to use it in the house, and I could use the brass fire fender in other houses, but no, I'm keeping it with the house. Everything stays with the house. Okay, let's close that one. And then this one, we have more things. Now here are the dolls that I didn't use. And this one is an early doll, but I really wanted to use Grodner tiles. And as you can see, these are much later, really not good condition. And I just wanted to use Grodner tiles in the house. And so, but they're here, they're resting, they're sleeping. They still are in the house technically. I just decided not to use them in the house. Now, I wanted to share these with you. These are really cool. They're not in the house. I may end up putting them in the house. These are also described in Flora Gill's book. So they're these two little Swiss landscapes under these glass domes. Now, one of the domes was missing completely, and the other one was broken and jagged and so sharp and dangerous I did toss it. But again, thanks to the internet, I managed to find two glass domes that fit absolutely perfectly. And I wanted to read to you about these pieces in Flora Gill's book. I will place them here for you to look at while I read, although they don't belong in the distillery for sure. Okay, Flora Gill says, "The real delights, and they are riveting, are two little Swiss landscapes, rocky and absurd, underneath glass shades on alabaster bases." So she was quite amused with them, and I am too, for this reason. Similar to the story that I came up with and was following with the plant stand from Brighton, I imagine that this family traveled quite a bit, and I imagine that they went to Switzerland or Germany and found souvenirs and then put them in the doll's house. This is another piece. This is a little Erzberger wooden cradle with a tiny little wooden baby inside. Now, yes, Erzberger toys, I believe, were sold in the United Kingdom by merchants or at toy shops, but I like to imagine the family traveling to Switzerland or to Germany and finding these pieces and then coming back and putting them in the dollhouse. I just find that the more likely scenario and just a lovely fantasy to have. Close this drawer now, and I'm going to show you. Now this drawer is where I keep all of the provenance of the house. So it's pretty packed. Here we have a larger watercolor that Aunt Bessie did, and this is an actual watercolor of the interior of Aston Hall. You can see here it says Aston Hall, and the back it says Aston Hall, home of Aunt Bessie, Miss Wilkinson, again that F, maker of Maryland Lodge, Dollhouse. And there are lots of others that are much larger. She was quite a prolific watercolor artist. Again, that same string. And here we have a daguerreotype. We've already seen another picture of the lady herself, but here she is. Quite the Victorian grande dame. Yeah, that's her. And I found this on my own. This is a reverse painting on glass of Aston Hall. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this, but for now it's in the drawer. And I found other lithographs. Here we have Aston Hall, Warwickshire, Aston Hall. This is from 1830, just the time the house was built in Aston Hall. And this is a little bit later, 1850. There was this box, and inside there are lists of the contents of the dollhouse. Front hall, butler's pantry, I'm not sure what that is, music room, bedroom, etc. And list of all the furnishings. And I'm not sure who did this, but there's a print on the top, Knockin Hall in Oswestry. And there's also, the dollhouse was on view at number 1 Royal Crescent, Bath. And there we go, another picture of it. And there are letters and other lists, all kinds of things. Just, it goes on and on and on. I've never had a dollhouse with this much paperwork and provenance. There's so much here that I couldn't possibly share it all with you today, but it is truly wonderful, a treasure. Just in case you were wondering, this is Ever. And she was their baby girl who was born on June 16, 2022. And she was my inspiration for this house. And hopefully one day she'll inherit it and love it just as much as I do. What? You want to look at the doll's house? Take a look. That is the story so far of Gregson House. It started out in 1830, almost 200 years ago, as a labor of love by an aunt for her nieces and nephews and in memory of her sister, Maryland Lodge. And now it continues as a labor of love with myself and hopefully for generations to come as we continue to add to its story. Thank you so much for sharing this with me. By the way, as a PS, do you remember that I mentioned that Mary Ann, Elizabeth Wilkinson's sister, had 7 children? This little girl is our 7th child. I believe in serendipity. Sometimes things are just meant to be.